It's Monday, the 23rd of August. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lirio channel, and we have the preliminary report from the NTSB on the Bombardier jet crash in Truckee, California on 26 July. And looking at this report, it looks like this crew really stacked the odds up against themselves and ended up rolling snake eyes. Let's go to the bottom of the report and look at the aircraft and the weather first. Bombardier CL-600, November 605 Tango Romeo. They had a operating certificate for Part 135, though this flight was done under FAR Part 91, General Aviation, not for hire. Weather was VMC with 4 miles visibility and smoke. Remember, we had the discussion about the AWOS and the AWOS's inability to accurately read smoke. So at 4 miles visibility, I would call that marginal VFR. The Truckee airport elevation, 5,900 feet. Now look at the temperature dew point, 33 degrees Celsius at 5,900 feet. Do the density altitude calculation on that with a 3013 altimeter setting, and that'll give you a density altitude nearly 9,000 feet. What happens to your ground speed as the density altitude increases? Your ground speed increases. Remember, this is a circling to land accident. Now look at the winds, 11, gust 16, 280 degrees. So out of the west at 11 knots, gusting to 16. This aircrew elected to land with a tailwind. This flight started as an uneventful flight out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. The crew elected to do the RNAV approach runway 20, which brings you in from the north. The tower advised there was another aircraft inbound, so expect delays. So they did this turn and holding at the holding point of Alva, the initial approach fix, and then got clearance for the approach and did the approach on in. The RNAV circling approach, electing to circle, even though they were given the option by the tower to land on basically any runway they wanted to. The crew elected to do the left base entry for runway 11, the downwind runway. And right here in the NTSB data of the flight path, you can see where they were overshooting runway 11, looking for the runway. And then right about here at the golf course, with both engines screaming at full power, the aircrew ended stalling it into the golf course. This preliminary report is based on NTSB data and ATC audio from the FAA. The flight crew was in contact with ATC throughout the duration of the flight. As the plane was passing over northwestern Nevada, ATC began issuing descent instructions for the airplane's approach into Truckee Tahoe Airport. Once the airport descended below 26,000 feet, ATC advised the flight crew to expect the RNAV GPS runway 20 approach at Truckee. That's this approach here that brings you in from the north. The flight crew accepted the approach but requested to circle to runway 11 for the longer runway, and the controller told them to expect the circling approach. After coordinating with the Truckee Tower, the controller informed the flight crew that they would be number 2 for Truckee and would expect some delays, and ATC cleared the airplane to hold north of the Alva waypoint, the initial approach fix for the runway 20 approach right here at Alva. After one turn and holding, ATC cleared the airplane for the RNAV runway 20 approach, canceled radar services, and instructed the pilot to contact Truckee Tower. The flight crew established communication with Truckee Control Tower when they were near the Lumo waypoint. Lumo located right here, the final approach fix, right here at the Maltese Cross. Located about 9.6 miles north of the approach end of runway 20. The tower controller offered the flight crew the option of crossing over the runway. Let's take a look at that. So they're coming in from the north here. The tower controller offered the flight crew the option of crossing over the field and entering a left downwind for runway 29. This is the way I normally land at Truckee because it puts you into the wind. Left traffic, runway 29. Or to enter a downwind leg for runway 11. That would set them up for the downwind landing based on the reported winds. Once the flight crew announced they were making a right turn and reported runway 11 in sight, the controller then cleared them to land on runway 11 and informed them that the airplane was not in sight. So the viz was low enough to where the control tower could not see the jet as it was circling to land for runway 11. The flight crew acknowledged the clearance, which was their final radio communication. Multiple eyewitnesses observed the aircraft before the crash. Some reported that the airplane caught their attention because of its low altitude and abnormal flight path onto runway 11. He's overshooting final over here by the golf course. According to witnesses, the airplane was in a nose-down attitude and steep left turn during its last few seconds of flight. He was already stalling the aircraft in. A witness located about 50 feet from the accident site reported that he observed the airplane come from the northwest about 20 feet above the trees. The airplane then entered a steep left turn and banked erratically just before it impacted the trees and the ground. The witness close to the accident site stated that the airplane appeared intact when they first observed it. So it looks like all four corners of the aircraft were intact before impact. In other words, nothing came off of the airplane before impact, which is one of the first things the NTSB wants to verify. 3 surveillance videos captured the accident flight's final movements and were all consistent with the witness's account. So there is video footage of this accident that has not yet been released. The accident site was located on a hillside between a golf course fairway and a residential street, and then they go on to explain the wreckage pattern, and here they show north is going to our left. The aircraft just sheared these treetops off right here before impacting right here next to Reynolds Way. Okay, here was the trees that they sheared off. The flight path is going this way. North is off to our left. They just missed this house, sheared these trees, and ended up impacting right in here next to Reynolds Way. According to FAA regulations, the airplane was required to have, at a minimum, a 30-minute cockpit voice recorder, a CVR, because it was a Part 135 and a large aircraft, and an 18-parameter FDR, flight data recorder. And the airplane was equipped with recorders that exceeded these requirements. So they're going to have, hopefully, the cockpit voice recorder data and the FDR data. The FDR and CVR were recovered and were successfully read out by the NTSB's Vehicle Recorder Lab, and the data is being analyzed. So they'll be able to nail down pretty closely what was going on in the cockpit those last couple of moments. Reynolds Way and the golf course puts them right in this area here, well to the overshooting side of a left base entry for runway 11 at Truckee. As we look at the RNAV GPS runway 20 instrument approach, or any instrument approach, the minimums for each approach are divided up by category, A, B, C, or D. Note that category D aircraft is NA, or not authorized. This crew is performing the circling approach, so they're looking at these minimums right down here. It is assumed that the Bombardier aircraft may be a category C aircraft for a straight-in approach, but as we look at the TERPS data, and even though these are based on indicated approach speeds, the conditions for that day may have very well been pushing this crew into category D circling minimums, which is effectively not authorized. Category C would give them a minimum of 7,700 feet and 3 miles visibility. They had just barely 4 miles of visibility. At 7,700 feet, that would give them a circling altitude above the ground of about 1,800 feet. Here's a chart showing the TERPS data from the FAA, or Terminal Instrument Approach Procedures. These categories are broken down into indicated airspeed in knots, and normally one aircraft is given one category to operate in. However, according to TERPS criteria, an aircraft shall fit normally into only one category. However, if it is necessary to maneuver at speeds in excess of the upper limit of a speed range for a category, i.e. doing a circling approach, remember this captain is assuming he's a category C aircraft, which has a maximum indicated airspeed of 140 knots. If it is necessary to maneuver at speeds in excess of the upper limit of a speed range for a category, the minimums for the next higher category should be used. So if you're a Category C aircraft and you're circling and you need to go above 140 knots indicated airspeed, that's going to bump you into Category D minimums, which at Truckee is not authorized. And why is it not authorized at Truckee? Because you simply do not have the protected airspace. There's mountains that are too close to the airport that you will encroach upon if you are circling at speeds greater than 140 knots. Another thing to consider when doing a circling approach, which makes it even more challenging, is what are you going to do in the event of a missed approach? You're supposed to fly the missed approach for the published approach that you flew. And if you look at the runway 20 missed approach, it shows a right-hand turn out to Groit and hold. However, if you're coming into runway 11, how are you going to affect that missed approach? I suspect you're going to need to do a climbing left-hand turn to Groit and hold. But the missed approach for this approach does not align itself well for a circle to land runway 11 landing. By the way, because of rising terrain in the area, these missed approaches require a minimum climb gradient of 270 feet per nautical mile to 7,700 feet. Can you do that on one engine at that density altitude? There's another instrument approach that would have brought this crew into a more straight heading into runway 11, and this is the RNAV GPS runway 11 that the crew could have demanded that they accept instead of the runway 20, unless this approach was out of service for some reason. But there's an important note here on both of these approaches. I don't know if this influenced the crew's decision or not, but circling not authorized up here in the fine print, circling not authorized for Category C aircraft, which we assume this captain was assuming that he was in, south of runway 29, that's down here, and east of runway 2. And also procedure not authorized at night. Well, this was daytime. So even though the tower was suggesting, hey, you can set up for a left downwind for runway 29, and that's the direction I normally like to go, technically that's not authorized as per these circling approach plates. Perhaps the best technique to avoid this technicality about circling south of runway 29 and east of runway 2 not authorized would be for the crew to cancel IFR and then proceed VFR, which they had VFR minimums to do so, and then proceed on the left downwind for a landing on runway 29 into the wind. So doing a circling approach in the mountains at minimums is a very, very tricky maneuver. It's a maneuver in the Part 121 world that we don't even mess with anymore. It's just too tricky of a maneuver to do. It really takes very careful crew coordination in order to pull this off safely. We'll be staying tuned for the interim report, which the NTSB should have out in about a year, and a final report following shortly thereafter. Thanks so much for your support on Patreon that makes this content possible. As we get more information, we'll keep you posted here. See you here.